Grief has been one of my greatest teachers. And I have been asked in the past, how do you get to this point in your evolution? Or how do you feel so confident to me or so embodied? And first and foremost, I'm a student, always and will forever be. Secondly, my relationship with grief is a deep level of respect. And when it presents itself, I give myself permission to go all the way in. And I believe that life goes through the shamanic cycle, whether it's in a medicine journey or it's just life in general, or the seasons of life, which is death, purification, rebirth, integration. So as we evolve, the evolutionary process is the death, purification, rebirth, integration. And when the death presents itself, that is the respect for that season, because without the winter, we cannot have summer and vice versa. And so once the respect is made, if I don't respect grief, or if I don't respect sadness or shame or anger or jealousy or guilt or whatever dark side of the moon emotion presents itself, then it has to sit somewhere on my body. And once that understanding is recognizing, Albert Einstein talks about energy is not created nor destroyed, only changed in form. Well, if I don't express the grief, then it changes in form and it has to sit somewhere in the body. So it's either feel it now or have to feel it later, and it takes 10 times as long to actually process it, and it's way more complex because then it's literally the issues are rooted in the tissues. So when grief is present, I have a certain formula that allows me to feel it in its entirety. And if I don't have access to it, then I have allies that can support me, and I can go into that in a little bit. However, for example, if I'm feeling a deep level of sadness and I'm in a public space, the part coming back to your original question, which was learning not to neglect myself or live from the outside in, if I'm feeling some kind of way, I ask myself, what is it do you need right now? And sometimes that could be reaching out to a friend, a trusted friend. That can be solo time. That could be go and put your feet in the earth and go make a tobacco offering and say a prayer. That could be go and immerse yourself for 3 days in nature. But it's a deep level of listening of what do I actually need, as opposed to what is the space wanting from me and how can I appease that? Because that's the difference of living from the outside in or living from the inside out. And so there's something about giving myself the privilege of my process. And once the permission is granted and I can create a cocoon or a safe place based off of what my actual needs are, then I allow myself to go all the way in. Feel whatever it is, the capacity I need to feel it at, as long as the space is safe. And what I mean by safe is, if I'm at a gathering and I'm starting to feel grief and just crying in the middle of the room, it's not going to be a safe space because people are going to be confused. They're going to judge the experience. They project that judgment onto what it is that I'm processing because people judge what they don't understand. If there's no context for why I'm going through my grieving process, then it can be met with judgment, which can actually create a little bit more trauma than necessary. So it's a discernment of when is the right appropriate place to allow myself to tap into that piece that I'm feeling. Once that space is set, and that can be many different things for me, it's sisterhood, it's solo time, it's nature time, it's camping. There's multiple different places that I can tap into it. It's allowing myself to go into the fullness of it and to respect the darkness. And there is Persephone, she's the goddess of the underworld, and she shows up and I have a conversation with her. I'm like, okay, I see Persephone. I wasn't expecting this. I'm at a gathering right now. And here comes Persephone. She is like, it's like the Grim Reaper standing at the door and she's just like knocking on the window. And I'm like, no, not right now. And he's like, you don't have a choice when you feel grief. And so when I see the Grim Reaper standing out of the window, it's about, instead of running and trying to avoid it, it's about respecting it and creating the safe space to feel it. I just so happen, if you are in touch with astrology at all, I have 4 planets in Scorpio. Scorpio is the underworld. Scorpio is the shamanic space. Scorpio is the unspoken. Scorpio is the really deep sorceress, like shamanic realm. I thrive and I live in that space. Like that for me is the most real space that exists. And that's where the space that I invite others into a safe way of being able to feel their grief. However, from that place, this is truly where I believe empowerment is born, when we can make peace and respect the dark side of the moon as much as the light side of the moon. And so there have been waves of grief that I have felt over the past 8 months. It's probably like the deepest grief I've ever experienced and the toughest time of my entire life. And I've let you into certain aspects of it. And I've also done it solo. However, I have learnt my greatest lessons from those places, and I've been able to meet myself in the deepest way possible. And where I think empowerment lies is learning to love yourself in those pockets. So when I'm crying all night long, like, and I can hardly catch my breath because I'm crying for 7 hours straight, like legitimately, like really deep wounds have been tapped, is holding myself like I would if I had a daughter. And if my daughter came over to me and was like, Mom, I'm hurting, I wouldn't be like, all right, fuck off. You know, that's how sometimes we speak to ourselves when we're in grief. But what would it look like if I replaced that voice with, let me hold you closer and I'm going to hold you and hug you until you soften your entire body? And Richard Rudd said to me that enlightenment or self-awareness is a series of softenings. And it's when I'm in the deepest pocket of grief and I'm feeling so much sadness and I feel shame come up or guilt come up or I should have done better, I could have done better. It's replacing those narratives in that moment when it's really tough to actually soften and to hold myself like I would my child. That is a revolutionary act in itself, because the separation I believe that we have within our own psyche of praising the high days and shaming the low days is the very separation that we're seeing on the planet. And I think that there's a revolution in itself when I actually learn to accept myself when the grief presents itself and recognizing grief is completely unpredictable. When it shows up, and usually when there's a pocket of like a painful period of life or the dark night of the soul, grief comes in waves, and it usually comes in sets of threes. That's what I've noticed, just like waves of the tides of the planet or the oceans. So when it shows up, it's in the acceptance, it's in the safe place, it's in the cocooning, and it's also a deep respect that a lot of power lies in the unconscious, and it's the unconscious that's being looked at. So this is the reclamation of power. And when it gives me that new frame of the grief, then I welcome it. Then my body softens. Then the gift can present itself. But right in the seed of our greatest challenge and our greatest pain points is the seed of our greatest potential and our service to the planet. And so once we can give context and reframe the story we're telling ourselves around what it is that's being presented, to transcend the binary that there's a right and a wrong emotion, and that actually the most sacred thing is what is. And as long as it's got a safe container and the discernment of when to tap into it, this is actually where our power lies. And that is what has helped me show up to today in conversation the way that I have, because I've renegotiated my relationship with grief and I've utilized it to be of service to the whole.